Well, thank you all for coming here, and thank you guys for coming all the way over from the UK. And we're so happy that it's finally possible. After all the shutdown we've seen, it's great to get some fresh air from outside. And one of the foremost countries in the crime fiction genre. And I feel it's safe to say that these four guys here, or people here, they have in common maybe sold enough books to deforest maybe Sweden. You've sold millions and millions of copies to very, very happy readers. And even though you come from the same tradition, you are quite different in your approach and what you're writing. And it is my wonderful job to try and tie this a little bit together. But I think we should sort of start out by giving a little bit of time for each of your books so we can talk about them and present them. And then maybe we can start delving into what you have in common. So maybe we should start with you. Clare, the book is called Hostage in Danish. I don't know if that's the...
It's exactly what it's called in English, which is handy, because I have a very small memory for titles.
And we normally have, in a crime novel, we have a police investigator, we do have a police person in your book as well, but the main character, she's a stewardess.
She is, yeah. She's
and
a flight
that's completely
attendant.
Different from...
I know, and do you know what? I'm really just living out my job fantasies when I write books, and I have always dreamed of being a flight attendant. So she gets a starring role. She's on a 20-hour non-stop flight from London to Sydney. It's the inaugural flight. It's very exciting. The whole world is watching. And a few hours into this flight, she receives an anonymous note from one of the passengers on the plane. She has to make a terrible decision. Does she do her job and keep the passengers safe, or does she give in to the hijacker's demands and sacrifice her family? So just your everyday work dilemma.
And absolutely. And I thought it has this very claustrophobic feel as well. You feel like, will I ever be able to fly again? and you address that in the book, don't you, as well?
Yeah, and I love flying, and I've missed it desperately. It was so lovely to get on a plane to come here. I don't, it's fiction, fortunately.
Yes,
but
and you'll be happy it is.
There's something about the claustrophobia of that tin box, 35,000 feet in the sky. It's the perfect setting for a locked room thriller.
Yes.
We're so close to complete strangers.
Yes.
And that's just rich territory for any writer, I think.
And I noticed there's a lot of the passengers who are quite annoying.
And they are, aren't they?
Yeah, like screaming kids, annoying parents who don't look after. Is that sort of is that something you've experienced in true life, and you've sort of?
Well, do you know, I fly a lot, or I flew a lot before the pandemic, and because I normally fly, I maybe go with my family once a year somewhere, but mostly I'm traveling with work. So every month I'm going somewhere different. So when you're on your own, you do a lot of people watching, don't you? You really look at who you're traveling with, and you're much more conscious of the person next to you, because it's not your family, it's a strange man that you're having the elbow dance with. And so I'm constantly making up stories and wondering who they are, and occasionally thinking, what if this person was here to do something terrible? Because I'm an ex-police officer and a crime writer, and so I always think about the terrible things.
You think the worst of people.
Always, yeah.
There's even a little bit of a glimpse into this sort of first-class flying. Is that based on...
I'm obsessed with business class. Someone told me years ago that the very first time you travel business class, it ruins you for standard travel. Yeah. And I didn't believe it until the first time I traveled business class. And I don't do it all the time. I don't do it nearly as often as I'd like to. But I'm really interested in the different people you get in economy and business class, because on the rare occasion I travel business class, I'm the overexcited person who wants everything. I want the blankets, I want the socks, I'm putting my mask on, I'm pressing all the buttons, my seat's going back. Like, I'm getting my money's worth out of that trip.
Good for
And
you.
then sometimes you sit next to someone who just sits there the whole flight. He doesn't even put his socks on, you know. He drinks water, and so I'm really
What do you
interested.
pay all this money for?
I'm interested in the politics
Yeah.
of people who turn left and how that makes you behave and the entitlement.
There's even one
sometimes.
person in the book that says, once you turn left on a flight, you just can't go back to turning right.
Yeah,
like once you've been to
absolutely.
business class, you can't go back into monkey.
Well, sadly, most of us just have to turn right.
That's true. And there's also a theme of climate in the book, but we'll come back to that. We'll now move on to Stuart. And hello, welcome. And you got to read this book, guys. It's just I was talking to one of my friends about it yesterday.
Let's just leave it there.
Yeah, and
My job's done.
and I thought
Fine.
how to describe this book, because it's very, very unusual. It's not your normal crime book at all. And I said it's a bit like you're invited to play Cluedo, but you're all the persons, you're all the characters, and it's really much darker than Cluedo. And it's sort of really drawing on the fine tradition of sort of old school crime writing. There's a manor house, there's like a set character list, and even, which I really loved, I'll show you to you, maybe you can't see it in the back, but then get the book, you will see it. There's a lovely little map here where you can actually see the manor house, who's in which room, where's the graveyard, and all
I
these.
need that map. So I listened to your book on Audible, and it's
Yes.
amazing. The audio is so good.
Yes.
But I needed that map.
Yes,
because
you
it's
do,
really
don't
hard
you?
to keep
Yeah.
track of.
Yes, I feel I didn't have the map, and I could have done with a map. Yeah.
This
But
is like
it
the ultimate
really
thing I
is-
hear
it's a
about
sort
some
of
people
book
don't get the
that-
map.
It's a sort of book that messes a little bit with your mind, but in a good way. But how on earth did you come up with that?
Absolute terror. I just wanted to. All I wanted to do was write an Agatha Christie mystery,
Yes.
style mystery. That's it. That's all I wanted to
you
do.
hit that spot, I think.
And then she's written them all. That's what that's done. So she's done them all.
So selfish.
No, isn't she? And then she
Really.
died. Like, a terrible woman.
How dare she?
So there was nothing left. So she'd done every great murder, she's done every great character, she'd done every plot twist, she'd done everything.
Yeah.
That novel is how far I had to go to write an Agatha Christie mystery that didn't feel like an Agatha Christie mystery
Yeah.
that she'd already written.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then,
Do you think she would have liked it if she could
no,
have
she'd
read
have
it?
hated it, I think, probably.
Why? Why not?
Because her books were brilliantly done in about 70,000 words, 60,000
yeah.
words. Like, for her, brevity was everything. So,
Yeah.
like, even by, she was writing 3 novels a year, and she understood that the audience, most of her audience, wanted the resolution. They just, and I was the same. I read those books and like, oh, cool, there's a guy in a car, there's a nurse. Okay, it doesn't, but who did it? That's what people, and she understood to get you there as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I'm interested in all this other superfluous stuff. I'm interested in the philosophy of this body swapping. I'm interested
Yes.
in these characters. And you talked about turning right and left. And this book is filled with class. It's filled with nobility and servants and what led them to these things. I'm interested
Yes.
in all of that stuff. She didn't give a toss about any of that. So, no, I think she probably would have burned it.
Yeah, maybe we should explain to the audience who haven't read the book that your main character doesn't even know his own name when the book starts, because he wakes up with the memory loss, and then he finds himself in a body that it doesn't feel like his own body, and then he gradually finds out he's someone else. But it doesn't stop there, because actually before the book is done, he impersonates 7 different persons, and they live through the same day. So it's also sort of like a murder Groundhog Day. Only not a happy day at all.
No, I described it to my agent, because you can imagine this was my debut novel, and when I finished writing it, my first thought wasn't, oh great, I've written a novel. My first thought was, oh fuck, like who's going to buy this? Like, it's so, and when I pitched it to my agent, I spent, I think, as long trying to work out how to sell it as I did like to write it. And I pitched it as an Agatha Christie mystery in a Groundhog Day loop with body swapping.
yeah.
And that was as condensed as I could make it.
Yeah.
But that's all it is, and it's. I hope like this doesn't make it sound too complex. I hope it's just fun. It's just a murder
it's worth
mystery.
reading.
Huge
definitely,
fun. It's
yeah.
huge fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean,
you, my
it is
friend.
like you were
It's
on
like the kind of
LSD
book
when
you-
you wrote it.
It's the kind of book you want to sort of read on a rainy day with a cup of tea, sitting in the sofa. and just take your time. But
And it is very satisfying.
Yeah,
You do
yeah.
that. You
Yeah.
know, at
Thank
the
you.
end, it's very, very satisfying.
but the same
great.
person get murdered 7 times.
Yeah, no, it's a very bad day for Alena. In this. She's not having the most fun time in the novel, but she's got other stuff going on, so it's fine. Don't worry about her.
Yeah. And now we move on to Elly, and you've sort of had more or less instant success here in Denmark with Ruth Galloway. We just love her. We can't get enough of her. And she, for those very few people, I imagine, who haven't heard of her, she's an expert in bones. She's based at the University of Norwich, and in this book that we're talking about today. She's going underground, literally, and it starts out with a restaurateur who has this grand idea that he wants to sort of create an underground restaurant, and of course, then he finds some bones, and the first one to call is Ruth, and then what happens? How
Yes.
much can we know?
So this is book 9 in the Dr. Ruth Galloway series, and in fact, we've also got book 10, but it's sold out. Hey. And book 10 is called, I'm going to get this really wrong,
I'm on it on Audible, but I couldn't bring it today. So.
Den Mørke Engel? The
Yeah,
Dark Angel.
The Dark Angel, yes.
So this one we're talking about now is book 9, and yes, it starts when Ruth finds some bones, and she's called in when bones are found under a cafe in Norwich. And Norwich, if anyone hasn't been to Norfolk, Norwich is a beautiful city,
You should
but
go.
it's full of tunnels because there's so many churches there. They've all got undercrofts, and there are all these linking tunnels. And I did an event there once, and I was going to this event, and the taxi driver said that you can walk the length of Norwich underground. Because there were so many tunnels. But the funny thing was, I got to the event and it was in a library, and I was telling this story earlier, so apologies if you heard it before. I got to the library, and I was telling the librarian this, and she said, this taxi driver, did he have a kind of dark energy? And I said, well, yes.
They all do, don't they?
Yeah, and she said,
Normal for Norfolk.
he was my ex-boyfriend. So, but it is true that Norfolk is loads of tunnels there. And in my book, I sort of explored that whole idea of that urban myth that there are people living under the city. And you have it in London, you have it in New York, San Francisco, and there was a particularly great myth in Paris, that there was a whole community living underground in the sort of metro tunnels. And being Paris, they even had their own restaurant.
Yeah, well, Paris.
So that's the start of this book. And famously in Norwich, a bus disappeared by falling into a tunnel.
Yes.
So this does happen there. It is riddled with underground tunnels. And of course, Ruth's an archaeologist, and she loves digging. So that's this one. And in the next one, book 10, I've been writing about her for 10 years, and she's never been on holiday. So in the next one, she goes to Italy.
And maybe we should mention to the audience here, there's a specific reason why you are so familiar with Italy, isn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, because those of you who don't know, my real name is Domenica de Rosa, so I'm partly Italian. So I got to write about Italy, which was lovely. And I also got to write about what people are like on holiday, which is kind of, I don't think Ruth and Nelson have ever worn so few clothes.
That sounds dangerous. Well, I remember, especially in the beginning of the book, Ruth is sort of reflecting on this thing about butchers that goes abroad and the tan.
Yes.
She's absolutely certain that Shona will get a nice tan, and she knows that she's going to go back to Norwich red with flaky skin, because that's,
Like a London. I wanted to do all that, as well as there being a mystery. There's all the thing about when you go on holiday with a friend, they have all the right clothes and they look wonderful, and you don't feel that you do. And they're both there with their children, so what time do the kids go to bed and that sort of thing. So
and the kids are arguing.
All those ordinary sort of holiday irritations, and a murder on top.
Yeah, and an old flame from Italy.
Yes, an old
It's got
flame.
everything.
Yes, a dashing Italian archaeologist.
Yeah. And I know you said that you plan altogether to have done, when you're done, 15 books about Ruth Galloway, and you are on book 14 now in English.
Book 14 has just come out in Italy, in England, and I'm just writing book 15. Yeah, so. It will be a pause, I think, after book.
A pause.
That's
right.
all I'm saying at the moment.
That's all we can handle at the moment. Yes. And here we have the new star from Oxford. Can we say that? I mean, sort of the crime tradition is that Colin Dexter, he owned Oxford with Inspector Morse, but not anymore.
Hopefully not anymore, yes.
Now we have Adam Fawley.
Adam Fawley, that's right.
And I think the books I've read that you've done, they're sort of an upgraded modern Oxford, and with lots of characters that feel very current, and also a lot of themes that feel very current. And this one is, I don't want to say too much, but we can say that it's about teenage rage.
Teenage rage in general, actually, because one of the themes I wanted to look at with that book is how much anger there is out there now. I mean, in society, that you don't have to dig too deep to find people are really angry about things. And I think even for things like road rage, you know, that people have no patience on when they're driving, but it becomes much more dangerous and worrying when you're looking at online rage, which is one of the things I look at in the book. So these communities of people, I look particularly at incels. I don't know if anyone knows about that type.
Yes, we know them.
But that's very dangerous and very worrying. Example of online rage.
Yes.
So that was one of the issues I wanted to explore. But back to your point about Oxford, when I first wrote the first book, and I actually gave it to my first editor, and she said I disguised it. I made it into another town, or at least I thought I had.
Yeah.
And I gave it.
Was that because you were sort of afraid of the Colin Dexter?
Absolutely. No, I write under the great shadow of Colin Dexter, and I thought no one wants any more Oxford. We've had so much Oxford, we don't want it now. And
Oxford is lovely, though.
What it is. And I gave it to my editor, and the first thing she said was, "This town is Oxford." And so I thought, okay, so rumbled. So I said, I thought no one would want Oxford. She said, no, of course they want more Oxford. Turn it back into Oxford immediately.
Yeah, right.
So
well
I did.
Done.
And actually, it's a great blessing because everybody around the world knows Oxford. So all of my foreign editions or my foreign readers, they all know the town I'm talking about. And I can afford to... I literally describe myself as turning my back to the architecture. I stand with my back to the beautiful centre of Oxford, and I look around the edges of the town.
Yes, exactly. It feels like a more modern Oxford. We don't hear about these old buildings. No. We don't hear so much about the university. I mean, it's there in the city, but it's not sort of an integral part of these people's lives. They're just normal, sort of middle-class people.
Yes, and absolutely, and that's the sort of crime I'm interested in. I'm interested in, not in, wild serial killers who have strange code names and send silly messages to the police and trying to, to fox the police. I'm not interested in that type of crime. It happens, but it's so rare. I'm interested in particularly domestic crime, because that's where most crime arises. It's in relationships, and it's in families, and it's in situations that people find, ordinary people find themselves in situations which are impossible to deal with, and they often make bad decisions for the right reason, they think, at the time, not knowing any better, and it turns out it was a terrible decision, and that's where things go badly wrong. And I think we could all imagine ourselves in a situation like that, so I think that's what makes it more relatable, perhaps.
And I think one of the places where you can say actually your novels, they remind me a little bit about Nordic Scandinavian novels, is that they are really sort of trying to reflect the society that we live in. Mm-hmm. And one of the themes in your book, apart from rage, is gender fluidity. Yes. And that's a difficult subject to tackle in a crime novel, isn't it? Or is it?
Yes, it absolutely is. And I definitely wanted to look at that, and it was very difficult to write it because I wanted to be as sensitive as possible to that whole issue. And I obviously didn't do too bad, because I had a lovely message from a transgender person after the book came out saying they'd never seen a book where it was handled so well.
Oh, well.
So I was really relieved, because that was obviously it was an important thing for me to get right. And I do like to look at different social issues in the different books. So the first one, there was a lot about the dangers of social media and how we don't really, as a species, quite understand how to use it yet. We've got a shiny toy and we don't quite know how to play with it without hurting other people. So there's that. And in the most recent book, which isn't out yet in Denmark, well, next year, it's looking at the whole idea of sexual assault, and it's turning it upside down so that the victim is a young athletic man and the supposed assailant is an older woman.
That would be interesting.
So it's the male and female, he said, she said, only it's she said, he said, it's around the other way. So doing that means I get to explore the issue in a really fresh way, because it challenges everybody, including the police. They're looking at, I've never done one of these before. So it was, from that point of view, I like to be able to explore things and take my readers not just with me on the story, but to think about issues at the same time.
Great. Claire, one of the sort of major themes in your book is climate change. And how do we handle that? And you write in your afterword that this is something that you care about as well. And was it difficult to sort of incorporate such a touchy subject into a novel?
I wouldn't say it was difficult exactly. It came about because although I knew I wanted to write a locked room thriller on an aeroplane, and therefore it was likely to involve some kind of hijack, I think we have a big assumption in the Western world about what a hijack is and what terrorism is, and we picture a certain type of person and we think of religious extremism, and actually terrorism is much, much broader than that. And I was interested in the years when I was in the police, and I worked as a public order commander, so a riot commander, and did a lot of protest liaison work, talking to extremists from all sorts of different groups. And I was particularly struck by animal rights extremists who show an enormous amount of compassion and love for animals, and love them so much that they will set fire to a scientist's family home.
That's pretty an extreme.
It is extreme. And so what I wanted to do was write about a group of people who were actually very ordinary people who had taken their commitment to a subject to its extreme, and to the point where it becomes terrorism. So I chose to write about climate change and environmental activists because it's something that's very important, very topical, and it felt very pertinent to have that on a plane,
And it feels quite plausible, like maybe not in hijacking, but it feels like the climate movement is sort of getting to a quite desperate place.
Yeah, I think we've only just started to see the beginnings of the climate change movement. And when I was writing Hostage, there was a demonstration on a plane, so I was about halfway through the book, and there were a group of protesters who broke onto a plane and climbed on top of the plane and wouldn't be moved. So I think we will see a lot more of this type of thing, but hopefully not an actual hijack.
Did you sort of research groups when you knew you were going to write the book? Did you sort of try and find out what are the options?
Because of my experience working with extremist groups and with protesters, I know quite a lot about how they operate. I know quite a lot about radicalization and how vulnerable people from lots of different parts of society are groomed into groups. So that was quite easy.
And you give quite an extensive sort of almost a manual of how the person behind everything is sort of grooming people online.
It's a handbook for radicalization. buy it here.
Next blurb.
Need more info.
So that was that was quite straightforward. Where I had to do a lot of research was flying a plane, because I have many skills, but flying a plane is not one of them. And in fact, I went to fly a simulator, and I took my son with me because, why not? It's nice to do something together. And he is quite good at computer games, and he flew this simulator and he landed it at Sydney Airport like a pro. He was so good that the guy who was instructing us gave him a round of applause.
Wow.
I had a go. I crashed
dear.
really badly. There was a big fireball. It was absolutely disastrous. But both things were quite helpful research.
Yes. And how about you, Stuart? I know the book is sort of set outside of time as we know it in a way, but do you feel like there's a lesson to be learned from your book for modern society?
No.
All right.
No, my book's got nothing to do. Like,
No.
the only lesson I'm learning is that I should write a book about a plane and go on a simulator. Like, I've made a huge mistake in my research, because my research is all about going to cold old houses and walking about them at midnight, which is nowhere near as much fun as crashing a plane.
Is that a scary thing to do, or just interesting?
Yeah, because I'm a coward. The only thing this book is set in Agatha Christie time, so that's that period of time, and it's supposed to reflect all of those eras in which she wrote, all the way through sort of late 20s, all the way up to the 50s, which is why it's got this sort of timelessness. There's a lot of technology there that at first doesn't appear to, it shouldn't be in this house, and then because I never defined the time. So the things that it's interested in are the same things that she was subtly interested in, which is kind of like, what does money do to people? It's what you were saying, left and right on an aeroplane. I don't know how many of you in this audience are fabulously wealthy, but you're probably awful if you are. Like, just everyone I've ever met who was fabulously wealthy is a terrible human being, and they got it by doing awful things. It's just universal. And so through her book, she's slightly concerned with that, but she kind of hand waves it away, she kills somebody and we move on. Whereas I had a chance in this to be, I'm from a working class town outside of Liverpool, and we're taught, we are radicalised to hate wealthy people. That's what we are. It's a breeding ground. The working class is a breeding ground for middle class hatred. So I instinctively don't trust wealth, and I'm interested in what it does to people. I'm interested, and so was she. So it comes out, but it's definitely not the theme of the novel.
You do know if you keep writing brilliant books and selling them, that you will become fabulously wealthy, and then you might become awful.
Yeah.
Or you'll just think they're lovely.
I think he's halfway there now.
No, I think not even halfway.
Halfway awful.
I started awful. That's why I'm fine. There's no pit for me to plunge into.
Just wait and see.
I'm already there.
But Agatha Christie is, because I've just written a Miss Marple short story for her centenary, so I've been reading lots of Miss Marple, and she's sort of worried about rich people being awful, but also she's very dismissive sometimes of kind of, I always think Miss Marple, when some poor parlourmaid died, this is my Miss Marple impression coming on, this is all she says: poor silly girl.
Yeah.
And that's the end. And
Silly,
I was
silly.
struck by how much more democratic your book was.
Yeah.
Because everybody, like domestic staff, guests, everybody gets a say, don't they?
They do. I was always a bit worried about Christie that I think when a parlourmaid dies, I think she's more worried about who they're going to get in to do
Well,
the
it's
job
very
half as
difficult.
well.
It's
That's
very
it.
difficult.
Yeah,
to-
you can't get the staff
Tina.
anymore.
Yeah.
That was exactly it. That was always the kind of sense of it. It was just like, God, it took me years to train her.
Yes, poor silly girl.
Yes,
Yes.
poor silly girl. I'll never get the blood out of that rug.
No, I know. And those sandwiches don't make themselves, you know.
That was
They
it.
don't.
But yeah, so it is the book. Like, of course, that's the thing. We're all concerned with, like, I think there's a thing that's changed, which is like more modern crime novels, especially in the UK. We're more concerned with victims. We are more concerned. I think we have more empathy with dead people.
Yeah.
Whereas in the, sort of these older books, I think there was a sense that they were just part of the puzzle. Like, don't worry about them. It's distasteful in this era. Like, there's dead people everywhere. Don't worry about it. Like, solving the crime. They're just
A long time ago anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so
life was cheap or cheaper.
yeah, it was.
Yeah,
So
well,
we're
it's
more
staff
concerned
anyway.
now with, it's less about the who done it and it's more about the why done it, isn't it? So contemporary literature tends to focus more on how things have happened, how has the baddie become a baddie, and how has the victim become a victim.
There's so much more of a psychological
Yeah,
side to
absolutely.
it.
Which is why, so the final point is why that book is 130,000 words, not 60,000 words, as Christie would have wanted it, because of all this nonsense I've got to add on because of the modern world.
But I
I've
think
done
also
it 7
another-
times over as well.
Yeah,
Over,
should
you've
be
got to have
7
a bit more
times
space.
But I also think like a theme that goes through the book is this how you could say about appearances, that you know the house is done up but only in the part that people sees, and once you sort of go behind the house, for instance, all the windows are broken and the furniture is moldy, everything's sort of rotting under the surface, so to speak. Do you feel like that's a theme you wanted to sort of promote?
I mean, you could either say that's all about moral corruption, or you could just say it's about atmosphere. Like this book borrows a lot from the Gothic tradition, so like I like Gothic novels a lot, and I wanted the house, because this book is basically set in a house. Like, again, you've got your aeroplane and I've got my house, and we don't really leave the house. There's some stuff around it, but fundamentally it takes place there. And if you're going to do that, you really need that house to be interesting. You really need that house. It can't just be a backdrop. It can't be a stage. It has to be part of the novel in some way. And I wanted it to feel lurking. I wanted it to feel like an awful place that people don't want to go into. So I borrowed from Gothic, and the decay is part of Gothic. It always is. Like, it's just what they do. Like, things are always run down. It's Havisham's wedding every day. So there was that. But also, it's just, if you're talking about rich people, as we've ascertained, like, and I'm not talking about, I just want to make this clear.
We're talking about
a few 100,000 a year, you're fine. I'm talking about the billionaires. They're all, there's something going on there. But if it's that amount of money, there is a decay to it, and there is something rotten in it, and the house is very much just about that.
Because it can't be personal. That much money, it can't be about you. It's just too big for a person.
That's it. Billions are coming in. It's coming in from places that people you've never met and can't understand, and sort of parts of your business that you've never set up, and from favours that you did for people that probably weren't ideal, but you turn your back on it. Anyway, I've just alienated half the audience.
And Elly, you are sort of in your book. You're also sort of looking a bit at a part of society that we don't see. Or we see them, but we don't really look at them. The homeless people. And I was really struck by how you sort of really give us a nuanced view about these people. Where do they come from, and give them lives, and how did that idea emerge with you?
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you think that. Yes, so I wanted to write about homeless people. Sometimes we say rough sleepers in the UK, and what happens in this book is people start disappearing from the streets, and they're said to have gone underground. And it's about how much we care about these people. And I did quite a lot of research, including with the police, and I was actually very touched by how hard the police do work to try and identify homeless people when they die and find their families, and actually was not always a good there isn't always a good view of the police, but this really I felt they really did work hard and really did care about them. But as part of my research, I went on a soup run, and
maybe you should explain people.
Soup run is sort of when you go out at night giving soup and food to homeless people, and maybe helping them find shelter. And there's some wonderful people who run these organisations that provide this help. I would say about 90% of the people I spoke were ex-army. Yeah. Who were living on the streets. And it is food for thought. It is food for, how much we care about veterans. And in the book, I sort of say that they're slightly like an army. You see them sort of slumped in the corner, sort of with all their belongings around them. So I really wanted to make this a central part of the book, and I wanted to make my readers care. That's why at the end you do have a little afterword about one of the people who died, giving his whole background, how he came to be on the streets, and sort of making him a more rounded person. There was a really strange stroke of serendipity. I think Cathbad the Druid might call it something else, but like a lot of us, I auction a name for charity in all my books. So I auctioned the name, and the man who won it was a guy called Richard Latham, and he actually worked with Rough Sleepers. So he was actually a really amazing consultant on the book. So it really did teach me a lot. Yeah.
And I think one of the strongest places in the book is actually, and I hope I'm not plus-pointing so much, but there's a dead person outside the police station.
Yes.
And the police actually pass by.
Yes.
Without seeing him, because it's a homeless person.
Yes.
So did you think about, was that, it's almost like a symbol of how we don't count these people?
Yes, it was. And, I had read about a similar tragic case of people do pass somebody just slumped in the street and not realise that they're dead. And of course, Nelson has a few words to say to his team when he finds out. But you know, this guy is somebody, and the police do, as I found out, they often do go to the trouble of providing a funeral for him, and you do find out a bit more about his life and, you know, who he was. He was a person with loves and fears and you know, ambition and people who loved him, and ended up dead outside a police station. So
he was well liked
he
in
was
the community.
well liked, yes.
Which I think was also very nice. You know, like he had places where he could go and he would get tea and.
Yes, yes,
so-
and sometimes there is a sort of great sense of community. Yes, it's you know, it's a huge problem in the UK. But you know, when I was out on the soup run, it did, you know, have a lot of laughs, and you know, people were very nice, and there was a sense of community as well. So yeah.
And we touched a bit about on the subjects of your book, which is rage, and
Yes.
there's other stuff as well. What would you like to sort of say about rage that you want people to take away from the book?
Well, I think partly how much we all have and how easy it is to get out of control. And I think that's one of the things that we find in the book. And certainly, I was talking to another writer earlier, and she said what I feel, which is, you know, teenage girls are the most scary part of the entire population sometimes.
scary.
And if you've been a teenage girl, you'll know why.
Because they
I've got a 4-year-old daughter.
Well,
I'll
yeah,
say
you got it
this.
all coming, mate.
Oh no.
No, but it's a combination of really, really strong feelings, and your brain
Yes.
is not fully grown.
Well, and also these days, the ability to communicate more widely with people that we never had when we were growing up. There was no social media. So I think that's the combination of social media and the you know, you're growing up as a teenager, your emotions are very strong, but you don't know how to manage them. So that's a
you
very
can't-
interesting area to put.
you can't see the consequences necessarily of your actions or a sentence you write online.
And a lot of the themes in the book, as in lots of mine, are sparked by a real crime. Because I'm a real true crime junkie. I love it. I read a lot of it. I watch a lot of it.
I think most of us are.
Yeah. And interestingly, I had a conversation about the sort of new wave for true crime, because it's become such a thing in the last few years. And I was talking to a criminologist, and I said, you know, I'm always asked why this has happened. What do you think? You know, you're an expert. What do you think? And she pointed me towards some really interesting research. She works in Oxford as well. And she said it's very, very interesting to see that the group of people who are most likely to be affected by crime, to be a victim, but are least afraid of it, are young men.
Well, yeah.
Now this one, you'll probably guess, the people who are most afraid of crime, but least likely to be a victim, are ladies of a certain age.
Yes, absolutely.
And shall we say that tends to be a very large component of the crime reading public? So it's very interesting and I said, well, why do you think then that this is going on? And she said, well, I think some of it's about almost doing it by surrogacy. Yes, it's a surrogate experience of it. It won't happen to me if I read about it, or if I read about it, I'll find out how to deal with it. So all of those things that come into play, I think, with why people are really interested in true crime. And I think the other one is actually our interest in injustice. We were talking earlier about caring about victims now. And I think now we have a very strong sense of justice and injustice. And true crime is about not just injustice and justice for victims, but also for those who've been wrongly convicted. And we're sitting in a prison.
It's the right place to do
I know.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
And I mean, there are some astonishing documentaries now, particularly set in America, about people who've sat on death row for 30 years, based on no evidence really at all, or certainly evidence that wouldn't stand up now. So
I know in English it's called miscarriage of justice, but in Danish the expression is actually the murder of justice.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, I love that.
Okay, so who wants to use that title?
No, me.
I will arm wrestle you.
So we unfortunately we have to wrap it up. We have only like 3 minutes left. So I just would like to hear from each of you briefly. What can we look forward to reading from you next in Denmark? You can start, because you were last.
I always said it just now. I'm actually looking at the idea of sexual assault and sexual politics and turning upside down and looking at it from another perspective. So that's It's called in English The Whole Truth, and that's coming out in February, I think, here.
We're looking forward to that.
So the next thing for me, the thing that's out at the moment is a standalone novel, actually set in a Gothic house. And in English it's called The Stranger Diaries, and it introduces a new detective, Harbin Decor. But the next Ruth book to be in Denmark is The Stone Circle, and I think that's be out very soon.
We'll be looking forward to that. And for those of you who live near Elsinger, I'm actually going to be interviewing Elly tomorrow night as well. On the last 2 books. So if you haven't had enough of her, just come by.
Can't wait.
This is my first novel in Danish. It came out about 3.5 minutes ago. So this is what I got. So go buy this, please.
We hope the next one gets
But
translated.
he's written another amazing novel set on a boat. So
It's called The Devil and the Sea.
yeah.
Devil in the Dark Water.
And the Dark Water, sorry.
Yeah.
So
that's nuts as well.
We are crossing our fingers that will be translated as well.
And I'm really excited because I've always written standalones, but this summer you'll have the first in a brand new crime series from me.
Yeah.
So that features a young Welsh detective called Ffion Morgan and a cross-border investigation with a lake that is on the border between England and Wales. So I'm excited about that.
And I could just say I'm reading it at the moment and it's brilliant.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We loved hearing from you, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.